The handcuffs went on in front of 37 parents, a parking lot full of minivans, and my 7-year-old daughter standing 20 feet away in a pink tutu and white satin slippers. The officer who snapped them on me didn't know, or didn't care, that the badge inside my jacket outranked every law enforcement officer in that parking lot combined. He found out. The whole country found out. And by the time the dust settled, $24.1 million was the number that ended his career and rewrote everything I thought I knew about the institution I had spent 22 years protecting. But none of that makes sense without understanding what came before the handcuffs. So let me take you back to a Tuesday in October that started like every other Tuesday, and ended as the day I stopped waiting for things to be fair. My name is Marcus Webb. I was, still am, a senior chief of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Civil Rights Division, Pacific Southwest Region. I had spent more than 2 decades building a career that most people in law enforcement only dreamed about. I led a team of 61 agents. I reported directly to the deputy director. I had testified before Congress twice, and my name was on the short list for a directorship that would have put me in charge of the entire Western Seaboard operation. I drove a 10-year-old Volvo because I cared more about reliability than appearances. I wore pressed shirts and sensible shoes. I coached my daughter Amara's weekend soccer team when the season allowed. I was, by every reasonable measure, a quiet man living a careful life. And I knew somewhere in the back of my mind that none of that was armor against the thing I was about to experience. Amara had started ballet that September. It was entirely her idea. She'd watched a YouTube video of a Tchaikovsky performance, the one with the snowflakes, and had turned to me with the complete certainty only 7-year-olds possess, and said, "Daddy, I need to do that." My wife Diane had been away that week for a conference in Boston, so I was the one who looked up the Sunridge Academy of Dance on 15th Street, filled out the enrollment form, and sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes reading a briefing document while Amara tried on ballet slippers and announced each pair too stiff, too soft, or too pink, Daddy. I need the ivory ones. I loved those 40 minutes. I loved the smell of rosin and wood polish in that lobby. I loved the way the front desk woman, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Alcantara, always remembered Amara's name and handed her a small wrapped mint when we came through the door. The arrangement was simple. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, class ended at 5:15. I rearranged my schedule to leave the federal building by 4:40, drive the 12 minutes to Sunridge, and wait in the parking lot for Amara to come out through the glass double doors with her bag on her shoulder and that particular walk of hers, half skip, half strut, that always made something in my chest loosen. It was the part of the day I protected most fiercely. Meetings could be rescheduled. Calls could wait. Amara's 5:15 did not move. That October, the trees along 15th Street had gone deep gold and rust, and the late afternoon light came through them at an angle that turned the parking lot into something almost beautiful. I remember thinking that on the Tuesday it happened, noticing the light, the color, feeling the specific quiet satisfaction of being exactly where I was supposed to be. I had parked in my usual spot, 3rd row, left side, backed in. I was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie. I'd pulled it off in the car. And my federal credentials were in the inside left pocket of my jacket, along with my service weapon in the shoulder holster I always wore. Standard carry. Nothing unusual. I was leaning against the hood of the Volvo, scrolling through a reply I needed to send to Washington, when I heard the footsteps behind me. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was flat, already carrying that particular hardness that isn't a question. I looked up. The officer was young, mid-20s at most, with the kind of squared shoulders that come from a recent academy graduation, and not much else. His name tag read, Pelletier. He was standing with his right hand loose at his side, not quite touching his belt, but close enough to mean something. "ID," he said. Not, "May I see your ID?" Not good afternoon. Just ID. I looked at him for a moment. 22 years in federal law enforcement teaches you to read rooms, and I was reading this one carefully. There were no other people near the cruiser parked at the entrance. He had come over specifically to where I was standing. I thought about the straightest path through this situation and said calmly, "Is there something I can help you with, officer?" "You've been standing here a while," he said, looking past me at the dance studio's glass doors. "We got a call." Someone had called the police about a man standing in the parking lot of a children's dance studio. I let that sentence sit in my head for exactly 1 second, and I recognized it. The mechanics of it. What kind of person makes that kind of call, and why? Because I had read reports about exactly this dynamic for years. I had read them. I had signed them. I had argued about them in front of Congress. And here it was, in a parking lot, in the late October light, with my daughter 20 feet behind that glass door. "I'm here to pick up my daughter," I said. "Her class ends at 5:15. I'm a few minutes early." I kept my voice level, professional, the voice I used in briefings. "ID," he said again. I reached slowly into my jacket, deliberately, the way every black man in America learns to move when a police officer is watching. Not because it should be necessary, but because the cost of moving any other way is too high. I produced my federal credentials. The badge, the photo, ID card, the seal of the United States Department of Justice. I held them out where he could read every word clearly. Officer Pelletier looked at the badge. I watched his face the way I had been trained to watch faces. Interrogation is part of my job. And what I saw was not recognition. What I saw was a hardening, a decision being made behind his eyes that had nothing to do with what the credentials said. He looked back up at me. "I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them and step away from the vehicle," he said. The cold moved through me then. Not panic, not rage, but something older and more exhausted than either. My hands were already visible. I had both arms slightly out at my sides. The credentials were in my right hand. I was doing everything exactly right, and it was not going to matter. "Officer," I said, and I heard the change in my own voice, the careful, deliberate steadiness of a man choosing every syllable. "I have identified myself as a federal law enforcement officer. My credentials are in your hand. I am here legally, in a public parking lot, waiting for my minor child. I am not going to step away from my vehicle." He reached for his radio, said something into it I couldn't fully catch. Possible 10 suspicious, 15th and Garland, male subject, refusing to comply, and then looked back at me with an expression that told me the next 30 seconds were already decided. Behind him, the glass doors of the studio swung open, and a stream of small girls in pink came out into the afternoon light. I saw Amara immediately. She always came out fast, bag already on, eyes scanning for me. She found me. Her face lit up the way it always did. Then she stopped walking. She had seen the officer. She had seen the way he was standing. "Daddy," she called out. And that was the moment Pelletier grabbed my arm. "Turn around, sir," he said. "I have been in crisis situations. I have been in rooms where people were screaming and everything moved too fast. I have made decisions under pressure that most people will never face in their lifetimes. But standing in that parking lot, with my daughter's voice behind me and cold metal closing around my wrists, I experienced something that none of my training had prepared me for. The complete, nauseating weight of being on the wrong end of a system I had given my entire adult life to building and protecting. The handcuffs clicked shut. 37 parents were standing still, watching. A woman near the entrance already had her phone raised, and Amara was standing 20 feet away, her ballet bag slipping off one shoulder, saying, "Daddy," in a voice that was trying very hard not to be frightened, and not quite managing it. I did not resist. I did not raise my voice. I stood exactly as I had been trained to stand, spine straight, expression controlled, hands where they could be seen. But somewhere beneath that stillness, something that had been patient for a very long time went completely, permanently quiet. I had spent 22 years believing that if you did everything right, if you were excellent and professional and careful and correct, a certain set of outcomes was off the table. The metal at my wrists told me I had been wrong, and the man who had put it there did not yet know who I was, but I already knew exactly what I was going to do about it. The back seat of a police cruiser smells like industrial cleaner and something underneath it that no amount of cleaning ever fully removes. I know this because I have ridden in the back of police vehicles before. As a federal observer, as an escort, once during a joint operation in 2019, when we needed a fast extraction and the nearest available transport was a county cruiser. I had never ridden in one in handcuffs. The plastic seat was hard and slightly sticky, and the partition between me and Pelletier was scratched to near opacity. Through it I could see the back of his neck, the short cropped hair above his collar, the slight tension in his jaw. He had not said a word since closing the door. I looked out the window. The parking lot was still visible. Mrs. Alcantara had come out through the studio's glass doors and was crouching down next to Amara, one arm around her shoulders. Amara's face was turned toward the cruiser. Her ballet bag was on the ground next to her feet. She wasn't crying yet. She was doing the thing she did when she was trying very hard to be brave, pressing her lips together the way Diane did. That exact same expression, the jaw set just slightly forward. 7 years old, and already she had learned to hold herself together when everything was falling apart. Something in my chest turned to stone when I saw that. Not hot rage. Something colder, more permanent, more useful. My phone was in my jacket pocket. They hadn't taken it yet. I had approximately 90 seconds before we reached the precinct and processing began. I used them. I opened my contacts and called the one number I had memorized for exactly this category of situation. Not because I ever truly believed I would need it, but because 22 years in civil rights enforcement teaches you to know where the exits are. The phone rang twice. "Deputy Director's office," said the voice on the other end. Constance, the DD's executive assistant, who had been at that desk for 11 years and had heard everything. "Constance," I said, and I kept my voice completely level. "This is Marcus Webb, Senior Chief, Civil Rights, Pacific Southwest. I need you to pull up my file and confirm my credentials to whoever needs to hear it in the next 10 minutes. I am currently in the back of a local police cruiser, and I will be arriving at—" I glanced at the street sign through the partition. The Sunridge Precinct House. I have not been told the grounds. I have not been read my rights. My daughter is a minor currently without a parent in the parking lot of the Sunridge Academy of Dance on 15th Street. I need a call made to the precinct captain. Now. A pause that lasted exactly 1.5 seconds. Then Constance said, "I have your file open. Understood. Connecting." The call transferred before we reached the precinct parking lot. I was processed, wrists photographed, belongings logged, but my phone had already rung 4 times during the 2 minutes between the cruiser door opening and my elbow being taken by a desk officer, and each time it rang, I watched the faces of the people around me change. The desk sergeant answered one of those calls. I watched the color go out of his face the way color drains from a document left in sunlight. Slowly at first, then completely. He set the phone down, looked at Pelletier, and said something in a low voice that I was not close enough to hear. Pelletier looked at me. For the first time since the parking lot, he actually looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. And what I saw in that look was not remorse. It was the very beginning of a calculation. It was too late for calculations. The precinct captain, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s named Captain Anita Drummond, came through the interior door approximately 4 minutes later. She was still buttoning her jacket over a coffee-stained shirt, which told me she had been off duty, and called in. She crossed the room, stopped in front of me, looked at the cuffs, looked at Pelletier, and said, in a voice that was doing extraordinary work staying professional, "Get those off him." The handcuffs came off. I rolled my wrists once, set my face back to neutral, and said nothing while Captain Drummond apologized, twice formally, and once more in what sounded like a genuine aside that she directed at the floor rather than at me. I listened to all three versions. Then I said, "My daughter is still in that parking lot. I'd like to go to her." They drove me back in an unmarked car. Captain Drummond came personally. Neither of us spoke during the drive. When we pulled into the Sunridge lot, Amara was sitting on the front step of the studio with Mrs. Alcantara beside her, both of them holding paper cups of something warm. Amara saw the car, saw me get out, and the bravery she had been holding in her jaw for the last 37 minutes came apart all at once. She ran across the parking lot and hit me at about hip height, and held on with both arms, and I picked her up and held her against my chest, and said, "I've got you. I've got you. Everything's fine." She smelled like rosin and the strawberry shampoo Diane used on her hair on Sundays. Over the top of her head I could see Captain Drummond standing at a respectful distance, hands clasped in front of her, looking at the asphalt. That was the moment. Not in the back of the cruiser, not when the handcuffs went on, not when I watched Amara's face through the window, but here, in the parking lot, in the October light, with my daughter's weight in my arms and a police captain staring at the ground because she could not look me in the eye. That was when the icy quiet I had been holding inside me since the handcuffs clicked became something structural, something I could build on. I was not going to file a quiet complaint. I was not going to accept an internal apology delivered through department channels. I was not going to let Pelletier write his report and return to his shift and call this a misunderstanding and wait for the next Tuesday afternoon and the next parking lot and the next 7-year-old watching her father get put in the back of a car for standing in a public place, while black. I set Amara down, smoothed her hair back, and looked at her. "Can you wait with Mrs. Alcantara 5 more minutes?" She nodded, pressing her lips together again. Stone brave. I walked back to Captain Drummond. "I'll need the full incident report, the body cam footage, the dispatch call record, and Officer Pelletier's personnel file," I said. "You'll hear from my attorney by tomorrow morning, and you'll hear from the Department of Justice by the end of the week." She looked up. Something moved in her face. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition. The kind of recognition that means, "I knew this was coming, and here it is." She said, "Mr. Webb, Chief Webb, I want you to know that what happened today does not represent—" "I know it doesn't represent your department's best values," I said. "I've heard that statement many times, Captain. I've written it myself, in reports, reviewing incidents that happened to other people. I'd like the footage and the files, please." She gave me everything I asked for. The attorney I called that evening was a woman named Patricia Hale, who had been litigating federal civil rights cases for 23 years, and whose settlement record was the kind that made insurance departments lose sleep. I reached her at home at 8:30 and told her the whole thing in 11 minutes, start to finish. There was a long pause when I finished. "You have the body cam footage?" she said. "Emailed to me by the department 40 minutes ago. You have the original credentials you showed him." "In my jacket pocket." "You have witnesses?" 37 parents, a front desk employee, security footage from the studio entrance." Another pause. Then Patricia said quietly, "Marcus, they cuffed a sitting senior chief of the FBI's Civil Rights Division in front of his 7-year-old daughter after he presented federal credentials, in response to a call that will almost certainly prove to be racially motivated, with body cam footage running the entire time." A beat. "I'll be at your office at 7:30 tomorrow." I did not sleep that night. Diane had flown home the moment I called her. She was through the door by 9:15, still in her conference blazer, and she held me the way she hadn't held me since Amara was born, both arms tight, no words for a long minute. Then she pulled back, looked at my face, read it correctly, and said, "Tell me what you need." I told her. She made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with me until 2 in the morning, while I read through every page of Pelletier's personnel file and Patricia's preliminary brief, and she did not once tell me to be careful or measured, or to think about what a public case would mean for my career. She knew what it would mean. We both did. She also knew, as I did, that Amara had not spoken a single word since we got home, that she had eaten half her dinner in silence, gone through her bath without the usual arguments about hair washing, and fallen asleep with the light still on, one arm around the stuffed elephant she had not brought to bed since she was 4. We both knew what that silence cost. The case filed 6 days later. Patricia moved fast, and she moved publicly. A federal civil rights complaint against Officer Pelletier personally, against the department, and against the municipality, accompanied by a press release timed for the 6 o'clock news cycle on a Thursday. The body cam footage was attached in full. By Friday morning it had been viewed 4 million times. By Saturday it had a name, The Parking Lot Arrest, and every major outlet had run the segment that showed, in 17 seconds of unambiguous high-definition footage, a federal officer presenting valid DOJ credentials being ignored and then handcuffed in front of a dance studio full of children. By Sunday, the precinct's phone lines were so overwhelmed, the department issued a statement asking the public to stop calling. Pelletier's union rep issued a statement on his behalf saying he had followed proper protocol. The statement mentioned that the officer made a good-faith judgment call based on available information. Patricia sent me the statement with a single line of her own at the bottom. Let them say that in court. The deposition phase was where the case truly came apart for the other side. Not dramatically, not in the way of movies, but in the grinding, methodical way that actual legal proceedings work, which is worse. The caller who had phoned in the suspicious mail report was identified through phone records. She was a 43-year-old woman who lived 2 blocks from the studio. In her deposition, under oath, she stated that she had called because she saw a man who looked like he didn't belong there. She could not articulate what didn't belong meant in the context of a public commercial parking lot at 5 in the afternoon. She acknowledged she had not seen any threatening behavior. She acknowledged she had not spoken to me. She acknowledged she had not attempted to verify whether I was a parent of one of the students before dialing. The transcript of her deposition was 41 pages. Page 12 was the one Patricia highlighted for me. The caller's description of what had alarmed her, broken down to its irreducible logic, was that I was a black man who was calm, well-dressed, and stationary. That was the entire threat assessment. That was the 911 call that ended Pelletier's career. The municipality's legal team attempted 3 settlement offers over the course of 5 months. The first was low enough that Patricia declined to bring it to me. The second I declined in 30 seconds. The third came in at 16 million. I sat with it for a night, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to feel what it felt like to hold it and know it wasn't enough. In the morning, I called Patricia and said no. The number we ultimately settled on, $24.1 million, plus mandatory department-wide civil rights retraining, plus the permanent removal of Officer Pelletier from sworn law enforcement, barred from carrying a badge in any jurisdiction, was announced on a Thursday morning in March, 7 months after the October afternoon it had started. I was not present at the press conference. Patricia handled it. I was sitting in the parking lot of the Sunridge Academy of Dance on 15th Street in my 10-year-old Volvo, backed into the 3rd row on the left side, waiting for the 5:15 release. The trees were different now, bare through most of February, just beginning to bud green at the tips. The afternoon light had moved to a lower angle than October. Mrs. Alcantara had put a small paper sign in the studio window that I had noticed a few weeks ago and not mentioned to anyone. It was a drawing of a ballet dancer, and written underneath it in careful block letters it said, "Welcome, Amara's dad." I did not know who had made it. I did not need to know. I looked at it through the windshield and felt something inside me that had been rigid for 7 months, release by one precise, careful degree. The glass doors opened, and the small figures in pink began to come out into the afternoon. Amara was third. She always came out fast, bag already on, eyes scanning. And when she found the Volvo, she did the thing she always did, that half-skip, half-strut across the parking lot. I got out and opened the passenger door, and she threw her bag in first and then climbed up and buckled herself before I had even closed the door, which was new, a thing she had started doing in November as though she needed to prove she could do it herself. I went around to my side and got in and started the car. "How was class?" I said. "We did arabesque," she said. I fell over twice, but then I didn't. "Then you didn't," I said. "That's the whole thing right there." She looked at me with the expression she used when she was deciding whether an adult was saying something sensible or just filling the air. Then she nodded slowly, apparently satisfied, and turned to look out the window as I pulled out of the lot. The late light came through the windshield at an angle that caught the top of her head, the fine edges of her hair, the careful part Diane had made that morning, and turned it briefly gold. I drove home through the 15th Street trees, the ones going green at the tips, and thought about nothing in particular for the first time in 7 months. The parking lot was behind us. Everything else was ahead. Some days I still reach into my jacket pocket out of habit and feel for credentials I no longer need to prove anything with. But when I pull my hand back empty, I am no longer afraid. I know exactly who I am. And so, now, does everyone else.